My brother's place became his prison. The 1 month that changed everything. I never expected a simple phone call could change everything. But here I am, sitting in the quiet of my living room, thinking about how everything turned upside down the moment my younger brother, Ethan, reached out. It all started with a text from him. "Hey, can I crash at your place for a bit? Just a couple of weeks." He didn't say much else, but I knew what that meant. Ethan had just gone through a brutal breakup, and the last thing I wanted was for him to be alone, stuck in that mess. He was family, after all, so I didn't hesitate. I offered him the guest room, thinking it'd be a brief stay, just a way to give him space to clear his head. It wasn't the first time he'd stayed over for a short while, so it felt natural. Besides, I wasn't exactly drowning in social commitments. My life had been pretty quiet, pretty routine. A few weeks with Ethan, I figured, would be a minor disruption at most. But as soon as I let him in, something shifted. There was this underlying unease that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the way he didn't sound like his usual self on the phone, or the strange edge to his voice. I tried to shake it off as he pulled up in his old, beat-up car, and we exchanged a brief hug. He was already carrying a couple of bags, things he probably didn't want to face back at his place. I let him in, offering him the space he needed. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this wasn't going to be as simple as just a couple of weeks. The first few days were fine. Ethan was grateful, quiet. He didn't ask for much, just a little room to breathe. But there was something off. A subtle tension that lingered in the air when I came home from work. The silence in the house that didn't feel as comfortable as it usually did. It wasn't that Ethan was difficult, it was just that, in a way, I was already starting to feel the shift. Maybe it was the unfamiliarity of someone else living in what was normally my peaceful space. Maybe it was just me overthinking, but I couldn't help but wonder. How long would it take before the quiet would turn into something else? The first few days were manageable, or at least that's what I told myself. Ethan stayed quiet mostly, retreating to the guest room after dinner, keeping to himself. I figured it was just the breakup. He needed time to figure things out. But then, little things started happening. Small changes that I didn't want to acknowledge at first. I came home from work one evening and found his jacket thrown over the back of the couch. A couple of empty snack bags crumpled on the coffee table. It wasn't the mess that bothered me. It was the fact that it was mine to clean up now. His things were slowly invading my space, the way the clutter seemed to multiply every time I turned around. I told myself it was no big deal, just a temporary situation. But it wasn't. I could feel it. The first real sign that things were starting to feel off happened that Tuesday night. I had just gotten back from a late meeting, exhausted, and was looking forward to the usual quiet when I opened the door to my apartment. Ethan was sitting on the couch, talking loudly on the phone, his feet propped up on the coffee table. I froze for a second, trying not to make a sound. "Yeah, man. I don't know if I'm gonna go back there. I can't even look at her stuff anymore. It's just too much." He was talking about his ex. I could hear the bitterness in his voice, like it was the only thing on his mind. I stood there for a second, unsure if I should say something, but I wasn't the type to interrupt. I went into the kitchen, trying to ignore the fact that Ethan had already made himself so comfortable here, like this place was his now. But it wasn't just the phone calls. The next day, when I came home from work, Ethan was in the living room again. This time with a guy I'd never seen before. They were sprawled out on the couch, talking about some sports game. It wasn't like I had a problem with him having company, but I was starting to feel like I wasn't part of my own home anymore. "Hey man, I didn't realize you had company," I said, trying to keep my tone casual as I put my bag down by the door. Ethan didn't even look up at first. Then he gave me that half smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Yeah, he's just a buddy from work. We're catching up. Hope that's cool." I nodded, trying to stay calm, but I could feel my skin tighten. Of course. I left them to it, but as I retreated to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That this wasn't just a quick stay, like I had imagined. It was becoming something else entirely, and I had no idea where the line was anymore. The next few days were more of the same. Ethan's friends, some of them I recognized, others I didn't, started showing up more frequently. Some stayed for dinner, some lingered on the couch, and the house felt less like a sanctuary and more like an open house. He'd leave takeout containers around the kitchen, his shoes scattered on the floor, his laundry piling up in the corner. It wasn't just the mess. It was the fact that I was now living in a space that no longer felt like mine. One evening, I came home to find him on the phone again, this time with a different guy, his voice a little too loud as if the whole world needed to hear what he was saying. "Nah, man, she's gone. I'm staying with my brother. Yeah, he's cool with it. I'm just crashing for a while. You know? Might bring some people by later." The words hung in the air, making my blood pressure spike. Might bring some people by later? That was the last straw. I wasn't going to be pushed out of my own space. I clenched my jaw, walking past him without saying a word. The frustration was building, but I kept it in check. I had to keep my cool, right? The tipping point came on a Thursday night, though I didn't know it at the time. I came home late from work, tired but looking forward to a quiet evening. As I walked through the door, something felt off. The lights were brighter than usual and there was music playing faintly from the living room. I frowned, noticing the faint echo of laughter. When I turned the corner, there they were, Ethan sitting on the couch with a guy I'd never seen before. They were laughing about something, the kind of laugh that made the house feel too full, too loud. It wasn't just the noise. It was the fact that this place, my sanctuary, my home, was now something else entirely. It wasn't just Ethan and his one-off visitor anymore, it was becoming a revolving door of strangers. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I dropped my bag by the door. I wasn't sure what to say. "I didn't realize you had company." Ethan didn't even glance up, too caught up in whatever inside joke they were sharing. "Oh, this is Chris. We're just hanging out." I forced a smile, but something inside me snapped. "Right? Just hanging out." The excuse didn't even sound real anymore. It had been weeks of just a friend, but now it was beginning to feel like a pattern, a regular cycle of random people coming and going, taking over the space that had once been mine. I told myself it was temporary, that Ethan was just going through something, but it was becoming clear this wasn't about a few weeks of healing. This was about him making himself at home in my life. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could ignore it. Over the next few days, the stream of visitors only grew. I couldn't even walk into the living room without seeing someone new sprawled out on the couch, eating pizza, watching a game, talking too loudly on their phones. The place felt invaded. I didn't know who any of these people were, but they were here, occupying my space, taking up the air in the room like they owned it. And then the real punch came. I came home one night ready to unwind after a long day. As soon as I walked in, I saw Ethan again, this time sitting in the living room, but it wasn't just one guy. It was two. The TV was on, but they weren't watching it. They were sitting too close, talking too much, passing a bottle between them. I didn't even have to look at them for more than a second to know what was happening. This wasn't just a friend anymore. This was a party in my house. My house. I stood in the doorway, trying not to let my frustration show. My eyes burned with it. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath, but I knew they could hear me. Ethan turned his head slowly, his face unreadable. "Oh, hey, you're home," he said, his voice casual. He didn't even apologize for the mess. Didn't even seem to notice that this was the fourth night in a row that someone had shown up. "Yeah, I'm home," I replied, trying to stay calm, but my fists were clenched at my sides. "How many more people are you going to bring here, Ethan?" He shrugged, clearly not understanding why I was so upset. "What? It's just a couple of guys." I was losing my patience. "It's not just a couple of guys. It's every damn night now." My voice was rising, though I tried to control it. "You've been here for weeks, Ethan. This was supposed to be a temporary thing. A month. You're supposed to be figuring things out, not turning my living room into a revolving door." He didn't say anything for a second, just stared at me. And in that silence, I realized something: he wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to acknowledge that this had gone too far. Instead, he just smirked like I was the one overreacting. "Chill, man. It's not that serious. We're just hanging out," Ethan said, leaning back into the couch as if this was all perfectly normal. The weight of it hit me then. This wasn't just about him needing a place to stay anymore. This wasn't about a brother helping another brother through a rough patch. This was about him taking over, about him turning my life into something I didn't recognize. The anger I'd been holding in for weeks finally broke through, and I couldn't hold it back anymore. "It's my damn house, Ethan," I shouted, my voice cracking. "You're treating it like it's your place, bringing in whoever you want without even asking if it's okay. I didn't sign up for this." The room fell silent. For the first time since he'd moved in, Ethan seemed to realize that this wasn't just about me being a grumpy roommate. This was about respect. "I'm just trying to get through this, okay?" Ethan said, his voice quieter now, though still defensive. "I'm dealing with a lot right now. You don't get it." I shook my head, my frustration boiling over. "You think I don't get it?" "I get it, Ethan. I've been trying to be understanding, but this isn't about you healing anymore. This is about you taking over my life. My space. And I'm done pretending it's okay." He didn't argue. Instead, he just looked at me for a long moment before standing up and grabbing his jacket. "Fine. If it's such a big deal, I'll leave. I don't need your permission to live my life." The door slammed behind him and I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart racing. The weight of the last few weeks came crashing down on me all at once. I'd let it go on for too long. And now everything had come to a head. But as the silence settled back over the room, it didn't feel like a relief. It felt like the beginning of something even worse. The next morning, I could feel it. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't comforting anymore, it was oppressive. Ethan hadn't come back after our argument, and I couldn't help but feel like everything had just exploded into a mess I wasn't prepared for. But that's the thing about silence, it gives you time to think. And the more I thought, the more I realized I couldn't let it go on. It was time to have it out. I couldn't tiptoe around this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I needed to tell him to leave, no more excuses. I'd done enough for him. I'd been patient, understanding, even when I felt like my boundaries were being bulldozed. But today, it was different. I was done. I heard the sound of his car pull up in the driveway, the engine sputtering as it always did. My heart started pounding. I tried to calm myself, take a deep breath, but my hands were shaking. When he walked in, I could tell he knew something was coming. There was a slight hesitation in his step, a moment of tension that hadn't been there before. But he didn't say anything. He just tossed his jacket on the coat hook and went to the kitchen. I followed him, not wanting to waste another second. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady, but I could feel the weight of the words settling in my chest. He turned, looking at me with a raised eyebrow, like I was overreacting. "About what?" he asked, though I knew damn well what I meant. "About you. About this whole situation. It's been weeks, man. You've been here way longer than we agreed, and you're treating my house like it's yours. You're bringing people over, staying out late, leaving your stuff all over the place. I can't live like this anymore. I need you to leave," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. For a moment, Ethan just stared at me, his jaw tightening. Then his face shifted. I could see the anger creeping into his eyes, the defensive posture kicking in. He wasn't gonna let me off easy. "Are you seriously kicking me out, Alex? Just like that?" He spat, his voice rising. "I'm going through a hell of a time here. You're my brother, for God's sake. Aren't you supposed to be helping me out? Not turning your back on me?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the anger bubble up, but I held it back. This wasn't about me being the bad guy. This was about me protecting myself. "I've been helping you, Ethan. I've been more than generous. But you're not even trying to respect the boundaries I've set. This isn't what I agreed to when you moved in. It's been weeks, and it's like you're taking advantage of me. It's not okay." "You think I'm taking advantage of you?" He laughed bitterly, pacing in the small space between the kitchen and the living room. "I'm the one who's been thrown out of my place. I'm the one who's been through hell. And you," he jabbed a finger toward me, "you're the one who's acting like this is some big inconvenience. You're supposed to be there for me, Alex, not act like I'm some burden. You're selfish. You're supposed to be my family, and this is how you treat me." His words were cutting, and it stung more than I'd like to admit. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. I stood my ground, my voice low but firm. "You're my brother, Ethan. But this is my house. And I've been doing this for you because you're family. But you've crossed a line. This isn't about me being unsympathetic, this is about respect. And you're not respecting my space. You're not respecting me." Ethan's face twisted with frustration. "I'm just trying to get my life together. Is that so hard to understand? You've got everything. Your place, your life. Why are you acting like I don't have a right to be here?" "I never said you didn't have a right to be here," I replied, my voice steady but with a steel edge. But you've been here way longer than we agreed, and you've turned this house into something it's not. You're not respecting the boundaries we set, and that's not okay. He threw his hands up in the air, a look of disbelief crossing his face. So that's it, huh? You're just gonna kick me out and pretend like everything's fine? After everything I've been through? You're going to act like I'm the bad guy. The tension in the room was thick, and I could feel the anger boiling inside me. I wasn't the bad guy here, but he wasn't going to make me feel guilty either. I took a step forward, my voice hardening. No, Ethan. I'm not pretending anything. This isn't about me being the bad guy or you being the victim. This is about me needing my space, my peace. And right now, you're taking both of those away. For a second, Ethan's face faltered. There was a flicker of vulnerability, of hurt, before he covered it up with more anger. You don't get it, he muttered under his breath. You don't get how hard this is for me. I could feel the walls between us growing taller, the distance widening, but I couldn't back down now. No, I get it. I really do. But you can't keep treating me like this is your place. I've been understanding, Ethan. I've given you a place to stay. I've let you bring your friends over, and I've tried to be the supportive brother. But this is where I draw the line. I can't do it anymore. His eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't say anything. For a long moment, we stood there, staring at each other, the silence hanging heavy between us. It was clear this was no longer just about a place to stay, it was about respect. And Ethan wasn't ready to give that up. You're really going to do this? He finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. You're really kicking me out? I looked him dead in the eye. Yes, I'm kicking you out. And just like that, the last of the tension broke. He turned on his heel, his footsteps heavy as he stormed toward the door. But before he left, he glanced over his shoulder, his eyes cold. I'll remember this, Alex, he said, the words dripping with bitterness. I'll remember how you treated me when I needed you. I didn't say anything. I just watched him leave, the door slamming behind him. For a moment, I stood there in the quiet, letting the weight of what just happened sink in. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure. I had drawn a line, and it was a line I wasn't going to cross again. The moment Ethan slammed the door behind him, I thought I'd finally found some peace. The anger that had been bubbling inside me for weeks began to subside, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the house was quiet. I was alone with my thoughts, but they were interrupted by the sharp buzz of my phone. I glanced down at the screen and saw my mother's name flashing in bold letters. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to answer it, but I did anyway. There was a tightness in my chest as I pressed the screen to my ear. Alex, what the hell is going on? Her voice was tight, laced with confusion and concern. Why are you kicking Ethan out? He's your brother. You should be supporting him, not throwing him out on the street. I felt my jaw clench. The words hit me like a slap. Mom, he's been living here for weeks. Weeks? I've given him more than enough time to figure things out. And now he's turned my house into a circus. I can't live like that anymore. Alex, this house is family property, she said, her voice rising with frustration. You can't just kick him out like that. He's your brother. Family comes first. Family comes first. I froze. The words rang in my ears, but they didn't feel like they used to. They felt like a threat. A demand. My eyes burned with a mix of frustration and disbelief. Tom had gone behind my back, playing the victim, telling our parents a completely different version of events. I'm just supposed to let him stay here forever? I bit back the words, trying to control the heat in my voice. He's disrespecting me, Mom. He's disrespecting my space. I can't keep being the one who gives. He's taking everything, and I'm the one left with nothing. I don't think you're seeing this clearly, she continued, her tone softening, but I could feel the disappointment in her words. Ethan needs this, Alex. He's going through a tough time. He's still your brother. You can't just abandon him like that. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't about abandoning Ethan. It wasn't about not caring. It was about my needs. My space. My life. My home. The message from my mom stung, but it was the next one that hit hardest. As I put the phone down, I noticed another text, this time from my dad. It was short but no less cutting. You need to think about what's best for family. Don't make this harder than it already is. I stared at the message, feeling the familiar burn of betrayal in my chest. How could they be so blind? How could they not see what was happening here? I wasn't the one being selfish. I wasn't the one disregarding the boundaries. It was Ethan, and now it seemed like my own parents were siding with him. I couldn't believe it. In that moment, it wasn't just Ethan who had betrayed me. It was my entire family. They didn't see me. They didn't hear me. I was just the one who had to suck it up. The one who had to give in. The anger that had been quiet for so long surged back. It was overwhelming, suffocating, and it made me feel more alone than I ever had. This wasn't just a conflict with Ethan anymore. This was my family throwing me under the bus without even knowing the full story. They didn't care that I was drowning. They didn't care about my space, my peace. And in that moment, I realized I had no choice but to stand my ground. If they wanted to treat me like the bad guy, so be it. I couldn't let them make me feel guilty for setting a boundary. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me, but it wasn't easy. The tension in the air was suffocating. But I couldn't back down. I wouldn't. I pulled out my phone again and quickly typed a message to my parents, trying to make my point clear without breaking. Without letting the frustration consume me. I've done everything I can for Ethan. I've let him stay here for longer than I should have. But I can't keep living like this. I've set boundaries and I expect you to respect them. This is my house and I need my space. If that's too much for you to understand, then I'm sorry. I hit send and the weight of the message hung in the air. I knew it wouldn't make things better. I knew it wouldn't make them understand. But I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep letting them treat me like the villain. I put the phone down and stood there, staring at the empty space where Ethan had been. The silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was lonely. And I knew that no matter how much I tried to stand firm, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But I couldn't back down. I wouldn't. The days following the argument with my parents felt like a blur, like I was walking through thick fog, constantly trying to see clearly but never quite managing it. The texts, the calls, the pressure, it all kept coming. But as each message from my mom or dad arrived, I could feel the distance between us growing. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just about Ethan. It wasn't just about me either. This was about my own life, my space, my boundaries, and it was time to take control. I knew what I had to do. It had been a long time since I'd felt truly in control of my life, but in that moment, standing in my kitchen, phone in hand, I realized I couldn't let anyone dictate my happiness or my peace anymore, not even family. Ethan had pushed me too far. My parents, no matter how much they tried to guilt-trip me, didn't fully understand. It wasn't their life that had been upended. It wasn't their home being invaded. I was the one who had been silently suffering, pretending that everything would somehow work itself out. But no more. The decision was made. I walked to the guest room, the room that had once been a place for visitors, but had now become a symbol of everything I'd been forced to tolerate. The bed, the desk, the clutter. It all reminded me of the time I'd wasted, the respect I'd sacrificed, trying to keep the peace. It was all just stuff, but it had to go. I wasn't going to let Ethan or anyone else feel like they could come back and pick up where they left off. With one final, defiant act, I sold the furniture from the guest room. The bed, the dresser, even the small lamp that had sat by the window. It all went. When I set up the app to arrange the sale, I didn't think twice. I just did it. It wasn't just about getting rid of material things. It was about reclaiming my space, reclaiming my life. Later that evening, I texted Ethan, knowing that this was the final step in what had been a painful, exhausting journey. I knew what I was about to do wouldn't make things better, at least not immediately. It would only make things worse in the short term. But sometimes, in order to heal, you have to burn the bridges behind you. You need to pick up your things and leave. I've made it clear, and I won't be asking again. It didn't take long for him to show up. When he arrived, the look on his face was a mixture of confusion, anger, and hurt. He walked in slowly, his eyes scanning the empty guest room. The absence of his things, the bare walls, said more than words ever could. "Really? You sold everything?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "This is how you want to end things, huh?" I stood tall, my heart pounding, but my resolve unwavering. "You've crossed a line, Ethan. I gave you chances, but you kept pushing. I've asked you to respect my space. And now I need to take it back. I can't keep being the person who lets everyone walk all over them just to keep the peace." Ethan's face twisted, but instead of the anger I expected, it was something else, something darker. "You think you're right in all of this? You think this is fair?" He stepped closer, his voice low, almost pleading. "You're my brother. I thought we were supposed to have each other's backs." I let his words hang in the air for a moment. I wasn't going to give in. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "I'm doing what's best for me, Ethan. I can't keep sacrificing my happiness to make everyone else comfortable. I've put up with this for long enough, and now I need to set boundaries." For me, the silence between us was thick. Ethan didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stood there, staring at me, probably trying to process everything I just said. But I wasn't looking for his approval. I wasn't looking for anything from him anymore. I was finally doing something for myself. And as the tension in the room finally dissipated, I realized something important. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about being right. It was about standing firm, about having the courage to stand up for yourself no matter the cost. Ethan didn't say anything else. He just grabbed his bag, turned on his heel, and left. I stood there watching the door close behind him. The weight of the decision settled in. This wasn't easy. It wasn't painless. But it was necessary. As the night stretched on, I sat down on the empty bed, now just a mattress on the floor, and let out a long breath. My mind raced with everything that had happened. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. But there was also something else. Something softer. A sense of relief. The burden had been lifted, even if just a little. I knew things would never be the same between us. Between me and Ethan. Or even me and my parents. But I also knew that it was time for me to take control. To stop being the person who always took a step back for everyone else. I had the right to live my life on my terms, with my boundaries, and without guilt. It wasn't just a victory. It was a new beginning. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. And that was worth everything.